perk your interest. Amanda Christovich joins us, Front Office Sports, here on 365 Sports. I loved your response. Last night, a lot of those stories, as you know, Amanda, came out about the possibility of other options when it comes to college athletics and revenue and all. And you're never ceases to amaze me, you tweeted, how much NCAA and top conferences are twisting themselves in the knots, admitting that they know they should pay the players, but trying to keep them from being employees. Your thoughts about that reaction?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's the main story about the business of college sports to me. Like it is the number one trend. It's the guiding light for all of the, richest conferences in NCAA, in my opinion, and based on my reporting, that they have all conceded that, they're signing billion-dollar TV contracts. Their athletic departments are raking in nine figures. They've got to start paying some of the players. They can't pretend that this is amateur sports anymore. But they've created this idea, which really doesn't exist in any other industry, that you can pay somebody for labor, but not call it a job or an internship or a contract job. You know what I mean? Full-time, not full-time, whatever. And it's just incredible to me. It's incredible to me that that's where we're at right now.
Amanda, what do you think about the potential for what could happen, and once they make this settlement of them trying to, fairly rapidly, like not before 2025, but even then, like in the next couple of years, completely remake what they're doing?
Well, look, I think that to the administrators, the potential settlement in the House case, which is sort of what sparked all this news, right, would be a complete overhaul. It's not really a complete overhaul to me, though. I think the complete overhaul is whether athletes are designated as employees, because that doesn't just change the fact that you have to pay them. It changes what their rights are. It changes the question of collective bargaining. It changes healthcare, right? So lots of different costs and requirements that the schools have to provide. That's really the overhaul. And I think that that's going to happen at some point in the next 5 years, unless Congress has something to say about it. But I just want to make clear that this House case settlement does not speak to the question of employment status at all. It doesn't address it at all. It's literally just a lot of money, billions of dollars in a settlement, and then billions more dollars in a framework for continued payments directly to players from the power conferences. That's not a revolutionary overhaul. It's just another added benefit.
Amanda, we had Darren Heitner on before and asked him about collective bargaining. There's some people out there, and granted, it's Twitter lawyers, right? So, it's whatever, but they say, hey, no CBA, no deal. And he proposed a different idea of like, hey, a CBA is not exactly maybe what you think it is. It's not like there's no issues to that for the athletes. Do you think a collective bargaining agreement is a must, or do you think that is something that is obviously got to be talked about, but not necessarily a must in future college football or college athletics negotiations?
I mean, I totally agree with Darren that there are downsides for athletes to unionizing and collectively bargaining, but those downsides come with, how well they can negotiate, right? I mean, the history of collective bargaining in this country is like the first contract you bargain for is like usually not very good, because you're going up against quote unquote boss man, right? And boss man is better and more equipped and more experienced in negotiating than your fledgling union. So I definitely agree with that, right? And there are restrictions that the pro athletes have to deal with, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, I don't see how we go forward without collective bargaining, just based on the way that the antitrust laws work in this country. I mean, you can't have, these caps on payments. They're not legal. And that's why the NCAA is losing all these cases in court. The only way to make them legal is to give an entity some sort of antitrust exemption. And the only way to get that is to collectively bargain. There's no antitrust exemptions in pro sports without unions where the players and the teams and owners agree to salary caps, agree to when they can and can't practice, when they can and can't play. So, agree to the terms of free agency, which is a big issue for the coaches. That's all they could talk about is unrestricted free agency. But then, some of them are pro collective bargaining, but some of them turn around and say, well, we don't want the kids to be employees, but we're upset about the fact that they can transfer whenever, wherever. Well, the way you fix that is collective bargaining.
So with everything right now, NCAA losing one lawsuit after another, and with everything right now, almost pro-athlete. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but, man, everything that has changed in the last, Amanda, 3 to 4 years has been in favor of the student-athlete. Why would they give up any of that now?
Like, why would
they ever agree to anything that's a restriction at all? Why would they do that?
Well, there's no one agreeing to anything for them. That is the problem. I mean, all these changes are coming from court cases that all these decisions are being made by federal judges and the National Labor Relations Board. So I think the problem is that we can argue, and it's like I spent all afternoon arguing, not all afternoon, but like a decent amount of the afternoon arguing on Twitter with people who, were repeating the NCAA talking points of the sky is falling and women's sports are going to die and Olympic sports are going to die. And don't you care about women's sports, Amanda? It's like, yeah, I care about women's sports. Okay. The issue is the athletes have no voice either way. They could, sure, the NCAA could impose some sort of restriction and they could refuse to play, but they've never done that. There was a movie that came where that theoretically happened, in a movie a couple of years ago, but it's never really happened in real life for NCAA athletes. So they don't really have a say. Even the things that are going in their favor are not really things that they themselves are doing, with the exception, I will say, of the Dartmouth men's basketball unionization effort. That's player-led.
Yeah. I mean, it would seem, though, that unionization for all athletes across all sports would be a very large undertaking. And again, we're probably a decade away from that being a reality, given all the hoops they have to jump through. So how in the short term do they make it to where there can be a little bit less chaos for them too?
Well, I've seen some proposals by, real lawyers, right? Who also happen to be on Twitter, but they're real lawyers who've, suggested this idea of sports-specific unions. There's a FBS football players union. And if you want to unionize, if you're a football player, you can unionize your team and you can add yourself to a chapter. You can become, right? That's actually how unionization works in journalism, right? They're on the West Coast and the East Coast, there are a couple different organizations. And if your newsroom wants to unionize, you can join that sort of national entity, the News Guild, the Writers Guild of America, right? So that was a proposal by a couple really smart sports lawyers. And theoretically, you could expand that to different sports to just say, we're not going to force any players who don't want to unionize. The option's there if they want it. But I definitely think that it makes no sense to try to unionize all the players in all the sports, even just in Division I. That makes no sense because they all want different things. They all have competing interests, and that's already what's part of creating the problem now. So I think you have to start with the sort of power conference players in the sports that make the most money, because that's where their economic rights are being restricted the most. And then you sort of see how that model goes from there. There's nothing that says you have to unionize every single athlete in Division I just because some of them are. It's the opportunity to unionize that they get, not the guarantee that they're going to.
Amanda, if you don't mind, I want to change subjects and ask you about the Florida State ACC lawsuit, the ongoing trials and tribulations out there on the East Coast. And I know there was, the last judge said that he wanted to see the parties go to mediation. And then I guess today there was a 60-day extension in order to find a mediator. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. But as somebody who's been following this, and I've been following it somewhat closely, but I definitely don't know all the ins and outs. Where would you sort of describe where we are right now with the ACC, FSU, so on and so forth?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm asking the question of the now 5 lawsuits
Right.
that are related to this, right? Because the 5th one is, it's just a public records request lawsuit by the Florida Attorney General.
Right.
To reveal ESPN's media contract, which ESPN and the ACC hold are trade secrets, right? So that's going to be a fun little politically charged battle.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, all of these cases are kind of proceeding through this motion to dismiss question, with the exception of, I believe, ACC v. FSU. Where the judge said, no, we're going to go forward with this. So it's kind of like this combination, as you said, of motions to dismiss, whether or not those are going to work in all these lawsuits, and then at the same time, some sort of mediation. Personally, I don't see how mediation works unless they're mediating an exit from the conference. And FSU has said they want to leave the conference, but as far as we all know, they haven't received an invitation to go anywhere else. Clemson has said they don't want to leave the conference. They just want to explore. So I don't really, I'm not sure where that's going to go, frankly. But we're in the very, very early stages, I think is the most important thing to remember of all these lawsuits. Like, unless there is some sort of magic settlement, which I don't think there is, because all these sides have taken a pretty hard stance. This could take at least another calendar year, at least, the entire 2024-2025 academic year, and football season, basketball season is probably going to continue. These lawsuits are going to continue during that. Again, unless there's some sort of consensus that everybody comes to, but I don't even know what that would be about.
Last thing is, if you, we talked about the timing of you getting into the business and all of these legal things going on. So
Yeah.
what would have happened had you been a sports attorney? I mean, can you imagine?
I would have been making so much
I
more
was going to say, add a couple zeros, right?
Yeah.
Jeez Louise.
billable hours. I mean, look, I've got a lot of friends. I went to Georgetown for undergrad, right? So I got a lot of friends who are lawyers, a lot of whom work in the corporate world. And sometimes they say, yeah, I have friends on the sports, the sports law desk or the media M&A, whatever, and they like read the front office sports newsletter, and they read, I made fun of a big fancy firm that I have a friend at in my ACC FSU story a couple weeks ago, because ESPN has hired them, to argue about hiding their terms and hiding their media contracts. So that's been fun. But yeah, I mean, look, the sports lawyers are even busier than I am. So yeah, I think that's the answer.
It's crazy. We appreciate your time and also your knowledge on it. Amanda Christovich with us, front office sports with us. She's been with us